As the protests against police brutality in France continue to rage, the government now has passed a controversial law giving police greater powers to open fire, literally. RT's Charlotte Dubinsky reports from Paris.
These new laws bring the powers of the police much more in line with the paramilitary gendarmerie here in France, which means that the police will now have the ability to shoot a suspect that is fleeing or a detainee, but only after they have given them 2 warnings. Now, it will also allow the officers who are on duty to shoot at vehicles as they're fleeing the scene, or to try and stop a rampage killing. Now, these powers come at a time when France is seeing protests across the country, but particularly here in Paris, violent protests at time. Now, these protests have been ongoing for 2 weeks in the city, and they started following allegations of rape, that the police had raped a young man in the northern suburbs of Paris during what should have been a routine ID check. An investigation is underway into what happened in that evening in early February, and 4 officers are now facing charges they deny. But there are huge tensions here in Paris, and it's hoped that these powers will give the police more ability to be able to deal with some of the violent protests and riots that we've been witnessing over the last 2 weeks. Now, it's an interesting situation because the people in the immigrant communities where we've seen much of these riots and most of the violence are saying that they feel they're being targeted by the police. They describe the police as being racist and saying the police often target young men of ethnic minority backgrounds, whereas the police have said that they don't have the power to deal with some of the rioters and some of the violence that we've been seeing. So essentially, these powers are hoping to boost what the police can do to perhaps ease some of those tensions. But the migrants community say that this will only increase tensions. This is a very vicious circle, and it seems that both sides are blaming each other.
As the 2018 Football World Cup in Russia gets closer, the BBC has just aired a controversial film about the country's football hooligans, and some of it looks pretty scary too.
What can fans expect of the host country if they travel to Russia in 2018?
Если вы попробуете войти в эту страну с мячом, вы от этого мяча и погибнете.
В то время, когда русских считали это водка, балалайка и валенки, давно ушло.
Well, there's been a lot of reaction. Russia's embassy for one in the UK says the programme was designed to create panic for travelling fans.
One gets the impression that the goal is to sow fear in British society and warn the fans against travelling to Russia. Based on edited footage of football fans' clashes in Marseille and violent Russian fans, the filmmakers from the government-funded channel did their best to discredit Russia and the forthcoming World Cup.
Kate Partridge looks deeper into the story for us then.
As the build-up to the World Cup gets underway, the BBC's sensational documentary, Russia's Hooligan Army, apparently revealed life as a football hooligan in Russia and had been headlined by the Guardian newspaper based on this comment by gang ringleader.
Это был спецназ футбольных хулиганов, которых отправил Владимир Владимирович Путин, чтобы покорить Европу.
An apparently stunning revelation, but to Russians it was tongue-in-cheek, a point Vasily claims was later edited, and he told RT that the interview he'd had with the BBC was less headline-grabbing.
We spoke about my past activity as a fan. Additionally, the BBC journalist asked me to comment on the incidents in Marseille. I told them that it was a total failure on the part of the organisers and the police. They also asked me about the upcoming World Cup in Russia. I said to them that Russia always welcomes foreigners and that people from Britain have nothing to be afraid of.
While, of course, football hooliganism isn't a Russian problem, but a global one. Yet the nature of the documentary, told from inside tough football firms, implies a new generation of Russian men enjoy a fight and query if the state has the power to stop them.
It looks like Putin's government has now decided they've had enough of football hooliganism. But has the Russian man now developed such a taste for violence that they can't be stopped?
While a member of another gang claims what was portrayed and how it was achieved was very different.
BBC journalists came to Orel to film a football game. Afterwards, interviewed several people, including me. I agreed to the interview, but I never thought they would turn out into such a provocation for Russia. We didn't take it seriously. It was more like a joke. They asked us to put on masks, probably to make it scarier.
FIFA and the Russian government are confident the World Cup will be safe, despite what seems scaremongering to ensure that few will travel to Russia to enjoy it.
We spoke to experts about the possible motives behind the BBC documentary on Russian hooliganism. These are their thoughts.
Football hooligans in many other countries around the world, and so why pick on Russia at this moment? I think it's clearly part of the start of a campaign, I believe, to try to strip Russia of the Football World Cup in 2018. Fact was that this was hooliganism pure and simple, and to try to trace this back to Kremlin and to, you know, to the idea that President Putin had sort of organised thugs to travel out to Marseille to fight English fans is absolutely absurd.
World Cup isn't meant to be a political statement. To say that the government is behind that it's a huge claim, and it's hard to believe that that's the case. Now, some of the right-wing groups that attach themselves to this kind of thing would like to claim, to give themselves credibility, they would like to claim that they get government support.
RTC's Shirali asked people in London if they felt apprehensive then about going to Russia for this forthcoming tournament.
Guys are getting ready for next year's World Cup, which is going to be in Russia. And we're just asking people whether, you know, watching something like this would put you off going there to watch the World Cup.
As being a white person, probably not.
We've got enough hooligans around the world. It's not just Russia, it's not just England. But there's a lot about Russia that would make me oppose going to the World Cup anyway.
I don't know, I think this is... it feels very propaganda-y to me that you're like... I mean, this is just some idiots. There's going to be English idiots going out there as well, so...
I think that probably right now this is just an attempt to create some hype.
I feel like this isn't obviously the majority of Russians. I feel like Russia would have some sort of security there.
So what do the hosts think? Well, the Russian football fans we spoke to had these messages for English supporters ahead of what's coming up in 2018.